What if I told you that deep in the heart of 17th century, Europe, an entire town faced a horror so dark it was buried in silence for centuries? This isn't a myth, it's not folklore, it's a true story of real people in a real place driven to do the unthinkable. In this video, we'll uncover how a once ordinary village fell into chaos during a time of war and starvation. We'll walk through the chilling decisions people made and how an entire community turned to cannibalism just to survive. Learn what caused the collapse, who took control, and what historians uncovered years later. But most importantly, you'll find out why no one talks about it today. It's a tale hidden in old court records, whispered in old books, and merely erased from history. So stay with us until the end as we peel back the layers of one of Europe's darkest forgotten moments. This story may just change the way you see history and human nature. Welcome to History Screen, where we explore the untold stories of the past. If you're fascinated by quiet mysteries, eerie facts, and real events lost to time, make sure to subscribe and join us for more. Year was 1603. Europe was caught in a storm of chaos, wars, disease, and starvation seemed to follow one another. Like the changing seasons deep in what is now modern-day Germany, there lay a small village called Wiesenfeld. Tucked between dense forests and rocky hills, it was the kind of quiet place where generations of families had lived and died without ever seeing the outside world. Life in Wiesenfeld moved slowly. Most of the villagers were poor farmers. They rose at dawn, tended to their animals, plowed their fields, and lived off what little their land could give. Children played in muddy lanes, elders gathered near fires to share old tales, and the local church bell marked the rhythm of their days. It was a hard life, but it was stable. That stability didn't last. Tensions were rising across the region. Religious wars between Catholics and Protestants had begun to shake nearby towns. Armies marched across fields that once grew wheat and barley. Traders stopped coming. Disease crept in, carried by soldiers, beggars, and rats. In Wiesenfeld, the people started to feel the shift. Food grew scarce. The weather turned colder than usual. Crops failed 2 years in a row. Livestock began dying from sickness or starvation. The roads became too dangerous to travel. The town, once connected to the world by trade and faith, was now completely alone. And then came the final blow. A siege-armed men surrounded the village. They cut off supplies. No food came in, and no one was allowed out. Inside the wooden gates, the people of Wiesenfeld were trapped together, waiting for help that would never come. The winter came early that year, and it came hard. Thick snow blanketed the fields before the last crops could be harvested. What little food was stored quickly spoiled or rotted in the cold. The villagers had always feared bad seasons, but this one felt different. Colder, darker, longer. The siege only made things worse. Soldiers camped outside the village, blocking every path in or out. No one could leave to trade or beg for food. No one could go to the next town for help. Those who tried were shot or simply vanished in the trees. The people of Wiesenfeld were completely cut off inside the village walls. Hunger grew louder each day. Bread was gone first, then root vegetables, then salt and grains. Families who had once shared meals around warm fires now boiled bark and leaves and dirty water. Mothers gave their children less food, keeping nothing for themselves. The church bell rang less often. People stopped coming outside. Weakness spread like a shadow. At first they ate the animals. Chickens, goats, even stray dogs. Nothing was spared. The village cats vanished overnight. When the animals were gone, they turned to what they could find: rats, insects, tree bark, and bitter weeds scraped from under the snow. Soon even those were no longer enough. Stories began to circulate of people digging into frozen graves, stealing what was buried. Others whispered of bodies missing from homes. No one wanted to believe it, but the signs were there. Bones found stripped clean, cooking pots that smelled like death, eyes that wouldn't meet. But still no help came, and the hunger only grew worse. As the hunger grew worse, so did the fear. And with fear came panic. Wiesenfeld, once a peaceful village of farmers and families, began to unravel. The rules that had held the community together started to break. Neighbors no longer trusted each other. People guarded their homes, their scraps of food, even their firewood. Eyes grew colder. Whispers turned into shouting. Fights broke out in the streets. At first they were small arguments over bread or water. Then came blows, blood, broken teeth. A woman was beaten for hiding food in her chimney. A boy was chased by a group of men. After being seen near a locked barn, the old and weak were shoved. Aside, the young grew wild with hunger. The town leaders tried to hold things together. The village priest begged for calm from the church steps. The mayor, an aging man with trembling hands, called for meetings in the square. They announced new rationing rules. Every household would get a small share of what little remained. But there was almost nothing left to share. The leaders sent messengers beyond the village. Pleas were written to nearby towns, to noblemen, to the church. They promised gold, labor, anything, just food in return. But no help came. Either the letters were lost, or the roads were blocked, or no one cared anymore. As the last crumbs of grain disappeared, order finally collapsed. Shops were raided, food stores were torn apart. A group of desperate villagers broke into the town hall and set fire to a pile of old records, searching for hidden supplies. Families locked themselves indoors, too frightened to sleep. Night after night, the silence of hunger was broken by shouting, crying, and the sound of doors being kicked in. The leaders had failed. The church had grown silent, and all that remained was survival. It didn't happen all at once. First, it was only a rumor. Someone said a body had gone missing from the church graveyard. A child's grave, freshly dug just days before, now stood empty. The dirt was disturbed, the wooden cross was broken. No one wanted to believe it, but no one could explain it either. Then, another grave disappeared. Then too soon the whispers grew louder. Some said they saw shadows in the graveyard at night. Others claimed they heard digging. A woman insisted she had seen a man carrying a sack over his shoulder, long and heavy, and sneaking behind the chapel. And then the truth began to show. Strange smells came from chimneys. Bones were found burned in fire pits. One family was said to have cooked a thick stew, yet no one had seen them kill an animal. Another man, once sickly and pale, now looked stronger, and no one knew how. The first acts of cannibalism were not killings. They were quiet, shameful thefts. Desperate people waited for others to die, then stole the corpses before they could be buried. The bodies of children, the elderly, the sick, taken in the night and never seen again. People tried not to talk about it. When they did, they lowered their voices and looked away. No one wanted to admit what was happening. No one wanted to see it. But they all knew the priest gave no sermons. He stayed inside. The mayor had vanished. Those who still had a sense of right and wrong could do nothing but watch as their neighbors crossed the line. No one thought they ever would. Some cried. Some screamed. Others simply sat in silence, rocking back and forth as if trying to wake from a dream. Mothers wept for the dead, only to have their grief shattered again when the graves were found open and their loved ones missing. Shame was deep, but the hunger was deeper, and for those who gave in, there was no going back. The people of Wiesenfeld had passed the point of no return. At first, it was a secret, a shameful act done in the dark. The first villagers who turned to human flesh did not speak of it. They waited until no one was watching. They crept in the graveyards at night, digging with bare hands through frozen dirt. They brought home what they found and cooked it in silence. Bones were buried in the woods or burned in backyard pits. They told no one, but people noticed. The look, smell was different. So was the way they stared, quiet, alert, almost guilty. Word began to spread. The whispers grew louder, and then others followed. It was no longer just the desperate. It was now the only option. When a neighbor died, his body didn't stay untouched for long. Children who passed away in the night were sometimes never seen again. In many homes, the mourning stopped. There were no funerals, no candles, no prayers, just silence in empty rooms. Soon the practice moved from hidden shame to something more open, still unspoken, but no longer. Denied families began guarding the bodies of loved ones. Doors were nailed shut. Mothers kept watch all night beside the dead. A father once fought off 3 men who had tried to take his daughter's body before sunrise. He killed one of them with a fire poker. The others ran. No one reported the crime. The village had changed. Everyone knew what was happening, but no one said a word. If you accuse someone, you risk being accused yourself. People started keeping to themselves. No one helped the sick. No one visited. The old eyes followed every movement in the street. A cough behind a window meant death could be near, and that death meant meat. Even children began to understand. They learned not to cry when someone died. They learned to hide. What they saw, one boy reportedly refused to sleep in his bed for weeks after his sister died. He believed she would be next. Hunger had not only changed their bodies, it had changed who they were. Wiesenfeld stayed hidden for months, with snow blocking the roads and soldiers controlling the paths. Few outsiders came near the village. But once spring arrived, and the siege finally lifted, the truth began to seep out. The first outsiders to enter were traveling traders and a few scattered soldiers. They expected to find a village in ruin, maybe sick, maybe hungry, but what they saw shook them. Doors hung off their hinges, the windows were broken, the streets were silent. In some houses they found bones. Not just buried bones, but boiled, cut, and clean. In one cellar, there were skulls stacked beside firewood. Word spread quickly. What happened in Wiesenfeld was not just a tragedy. It was something darker. Messages were sent to nearby towns. Church leaders were alerted. Officials rode in from the closest city, bringing scribes, guards, and judges. They interviewed survivors, took notes, and walked the village with covered mouths and shaking heads. They found more than they expected. Some villagers admitted what they had done, quietly with shame. Others denied everything, but the signs were everywhere, in kitchens, in graveyards, and in the stories. The children told without knowing what they were saying. The church was horrified. Cannibalism wasn't just a crime, it was sin, evil, unforgivable. Trials were ordered, names were written down. People were taken away in wagons, their eyes staring at the ground. Some were hanged, others were exiled. A few vanished before they could be judged, fleeing into the woods, never seen again. The town was left in silence. Bodies were buried, homes were burned. The name Wiesenfeld became a warning, a story whispered in dark corners. Officials decided not to speak of it too loudly. No one wanted the shame to spread. Over time, the reports were filed away in quiet church archives, where they sat untouched for centuries. But the truth never disappeared, waited like a faint shadow in the back of Europe's memory. Too terrible to tell, too real to forget today. Few people have heard of Wiesenfeld. Story of its hunger, its silence, and its fall into cannibalism barely exists in most history books. You won't find it in classrooms or documentaries. The truth is, it was never meant to be remembered. Time there were only small mentions of the incident, brief notes in old church records, court documents, or letters. Most of these were written in private, often with vague language. Words like unnatural acts or unspeakable sins were used instead of direct terms. The shame was too great. Officials who discovered the truth likely buried it literally and historically. Larger events soon took over the headlines of the time wars between empires, political assassinations, and religious conflicts filled the chronicles of Europe. A small, starving village didn't seem worth recording in detail. As the years passed, the memory of Wiesenfeld faded, lost under bigger stories, more powerful names, and louder tragedies. This isn't the only time history has looked away. During the Jamestown starving time in early America, colonists were found to have eaten human flesh. In 1098, during the First Crusade, starving crusaders at Mara reportedly boiled their enemies. These moments were rare, but they happened, and they're better documented, studied by scholars, and discussed in museums. Wiesenfeld, on the other hand, was a nameless village. No kings, no heroes, no survivors who wrote books. Just people forgotten, buried, and left in silence. In the end, the story of Wiesenfeld is not just about hunger. It's about what people become when there is nothing left. It shows us how fragile the line is between civilization and survival, how quickly fear and famine can tear apart a community, even one built on faith and tradition. Cannibalism is often treated like a myth, something too horrific to be real, but in places like Wiesenfeld, Jamestown, and Mara, it wasn't a myth. It was a last desperate choice made by ordinary people, not monsters, not madmen, just human beings trapped, starving, and forgotten. It's easy to judge from a distance, but ask yourself if your children were starving, if your neighbors had died, if there was no food, no escape, no hope. What would you do? History isn't always clean. It's not always heroic. Sometimes it's quiet, cold, and cruel. And sometimes the stories that are hardest to hear are the ones we need to remember the most. Thank you for watching this far. If this story moved you or made you think, please like this video and don't forget the history screen where we share the forgotten tales that shaped the world. Slowly, calmly, and one haunting truth at a time.